Our first homework assignment has been graded, and you can see your grade on Gradescope if you log into your Gradescope account. So when you log into Gradescope and look at your old assignment, you can just you can see your grade, just the number. But if you click through, you can also see kind of question by question how you did on each question, and I gave you some little comments if you got it wrong. So check that out if you are interested. And also, just in case, like the comments that I give in Gradescope, sometimes I have to type them in, and sometimes it's hard for me to explain in detail what exactly was wrong. And so I have also written up my own answers to the assignment and posted them at the class website near where the homework assignment originally appeared. So if you are ever concerned or confused about why you got this or that wrong, and my comments don't make any sense to you, then feel free to look at my answers, compare what you got with my answers. And of course, you can always just talk to me about it, but these are other alternatives. All right, we do have another homework assignment due tomorrow. I hope you've had a chance to check it out. It's, like the first one, I suppose, but about some different stuff. And tomorrow is finally the due date for the math chat question. About half of you have sent in your questions, so thank you for those. The resties, get on it. Any questions about any of that? All right, excellent. I do have one comment that I would like to share regarding people using their phones during class. This is something that I didn't mention on the first day of class because I don't really like being a tough guy about it. Of course, it's you are all responsible adults who can live your life the way you want to. But I figured I would just mention that I think it's kind of rude for you to be texting your friends during class. Some of you apparently like to do it a lot. Last time I noticed at least one person who was just the entire class long doing stuff on your phone. Like I said, I'm not here to tell you how to live your life, but it is kind of distracting to me. Just the fact that I noticed that means that I was paying attention to you in ways that I don't really care to. So. For my sake, I would love it if you didn't play around with your phones during class. Of course, it's up to you, especially if you're looking at a laptop. I know some of you are taking notes on a laptop, which is totally fine, but if you're doing other stuff, it can distract other people. I consider it rude, and it makes me annoyed when you are distracting me. But if you're distracting other people, then that is a more serious thing that I would get more upset about. So that's just my own feelings about the matter. Let's continue then. Let's talk about what we were doing last time was the Borda count. This is another system for voting. This is actually the fourth one that we've talked about so far. We had the plurality, the ranked choice, the Condorcet's method, and the Borda. The Borda one is the one with the points. You add up the points. So let's just try one more example to refresh our memory, and then I got one for you all to try. And then we'll talk about something a little different. So let's try the Borda count. I hope you remember the basic idea. Let's try sort of a big one here. This actually is my recurring example. We've done this same example with all of our other methods. H, say, D, C, B, A. This is the last time we'll look at this example in particular. 4 people said B, D, C, A, and 1 people said C, D, B, A. All right, so this particular example we've done before, and I will just refresh our memory. For this one here, if you do plurality, you get A as the winner. If you do the ranked choice, you get D as the winner. And if you do the Condorcet, you get C is the winner. Each one of those methods will take you a little while to work out the details. Although plurality you can more or less do in your head, but the other ones you'll have to work for. But we've done those already. Let's try the Borda. This is the fourth way to do it. So let's do the Borda. This is the one where you add up the points, right? And remember the way the points go it's 0, 1, 2, 3. So it's always 0 points for last place, and then 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then however many you need to get however many candidates you have. And the Borda, I would say, is the most like arithmetically intensive in terms of doing the math. Everything, all of these methods involve a lot of math, but they don't involve a lot of numbers, although the Borda really does involve a fair amount of numbers. So what we do, I hope you remember, you have to multiply and add. So A, how many points do they get? Well, in the first column, they are getting 3 points, but there are 14 people who voted in this way, so really what you need is 14 times 3 from the first column, and then plus all the points that they get in the other columns. Now, in this case, A happens to be in last position on all of the other columns, so this is really going to be plus a bunch of zeros. But just to be clear about it, I will write them all out. 10 zeros, 8 zeros, 4 zeros, and 1 0. Right? Each time you are multiplying the number at the top times the point value of wherever A is in the ranking. And if you do all of this, I used my calculator to do these ones just because I'm likely to screw it up if I do it by hand. I got 42. Make sure if you're doing this with a calculator, make sure you are doing the appropriate order of operations. So on a typical calculator, you can't just type that in on like your phone, simple phone calculator. You have to multiply all of these first and then add them all up. 42. Anyway, let's do for B. It is 14 times 2 this time because B in this column is getting 2 points from each of 14 voters. And then plus 10 times 2, that's because in the next column, again, B is in the 2-point position. Next is 8 times 1, then 4 times 3, and then 1 times 1. I hope everybody's clear on how I'm getting all of those. Each time you multiply the number at the top of the column times the point value wherever that candidate is. All right, when I added and multiplied these up, I got 69. All right, let's just do the other. So C is going to be 14 times 1 in the first column, 1 point. The next column is a 3-pointer, so that's 10 times 3. The next column for C is 2 points. That's 8 times 2. The next column is a 1 point, 4 times 1, and then finally 1 times 3. And when I added these up, I got 67. And then finally, the D's, I get 14 times 0 in the first column, and then 10 times 1, 8 times 3, 4 times 2, and 1 times 2. And these guys add up to 44. All right, so this is how we do the Borda. And the winner is B, because they got the most points. All right, maybe I'll just put that in my little list at the top there. Borda gets, the Borda winner is B. All right. Any questions about how we did the numbers? I got one for you all to try, but let me just say before that, the reason that I keep on redoing this same example is because you will notice, actually the answer you get, the winner, is different every time depending on which system you used. So sort of the moral of the story of this example here is different systems, let me just say different reasonable systems. We can debate about which one you think is better, but none of them is obviously stupid, right? Like they're all more or less reasonable ways that you could decide the winner. Different reasonable systems can give different answers. And you might think there are pros and cons of each method, but none of them is, in my opinion, none of them is like obviously bad. But they do give you different answers. So if you're thinking about doing voting in the real world, you're just going to have to choose a system, and you're going to have to deal with the fact that the winner is going to depend on which system you're using. All right? Any thoughts about that? Questions? All right, I got one of the Borda for you all to try, just to make sure everybody's doing it. This one is a little sort of shorter and easier, and the numbers you can do in your head for this one. So find the Borda winner. If you were doing the one that I just did, I I would expect you to use a calculator. Like when you're doing the homework this week, there are some Borda ones where you probably will want to use a calculator. As far as our tests, you're not going to use calculators on our tests, so they would be, the numbers would be simpler. And this example, I feel, is one that's reasonable to ask you to do without a calculator. All the numbers that you're going to be multiplying and adding are fairly small here. All right, here's the example. See if you can add up the points and find the winner. So try and do this one without a calculator. This one is, in my opinion, on the level that I would expect you to be able to do without a calculator. It's always 0 at the bottom. I got 13 points for A, just so you can check yourself. I'll write down what I got over here. Can we talk about it? It looks like most people are done, or at least well on their way. So for A, this is what I got. It was 3 points. Remember the points, first of all, they go, it's always 0 for last place and then going up from there. So it's 0, 1, and 2 in this example. I have 3 people giving A 2 points each, so that's a 3 times 2. In the next column, it's 5 times 1, because this is position 1. In the next column, it's 4 people and 0 points. That's 4 times 0. And then the last column, 1 person and 2 points. That's 1 times 2. And then remember, when you sort of add it all up, you have to do all the multiplications first. In this case, it's 6 and 5 and 0 and 2. And then you add those up, and I got 13. I hope everybody got this. I saw some people just sort of messed up the adding, which is not a big deal, but I hope it worked out eventually. So my other ones, just so you can check yourself, I got, when I did the points here, I got B11 and C15. So I hope that you got the same numbers. And in any case, that means that C is the winner, right? Because 15 is the most of all those points. Any questions about that? I hope that this worked out for you. The Borda, I think it's a very sensible way to do it. Like I said last time, this adding up points is something that anybody could come up with. You know, it's not a sort of super complicated kind of an idea. Yeah?
What if, like, for a problem, like, it didn't have, like, numbers at the top, it was just, like, people, and, like, would you just put the points then and not have, like, a number?
Yeah, then it would be, like, one person each. Yeah, so you don't multiply. Yeah, one of the ones on the homework is like that, where it's just a whole bunch of people and their individual votes. In that case, there should be no multiplying. It's just adding up points. Yep, great. I can tell she looked at the homework. All right, excellent. So this is kind of the end of our first little bit of this talking about voting. We have talked about 4 different ways that you could do ranked voting. And like I said, they all seem to me more or less reasonable. What I want to talk about now is how can we judge between these 4 systems or others? I mean, there are other systems that we haven't talked about, other more complicated ones. How can we judge between them which ones are good or not? All right, so we are going to sort of shift a little bit, and I want to talk for the next little while about various criteria for judging fairness of these systems. All right, which ones are better? Which ones are more fair or somehow more accurate? This is the big question that we are going to answer. And of course, the immediate response, if I ask you of these 4, which one is the best? I think the only sensible answer is like, what do you mean best? Or like, it's not obvious what is that supposed to mean if you say, if you, for instance, think that ranked choice is the best out of these 4. You're going to have to somehow explain to me why you think it's better than the others in specific ways. And there are different ways that we can compare them. So that's what I mean by, we're going to talk about various criteria. There are different ways that you could talk about which one is better. For instance, if all you care about is that it's easy to figure out who the winner is, like it's easy to do the math, then the plurality would be the best. Although this is not really, it's not a great reason to like the plurality system, just because any of these are not so hard to do. Anyway, we are going to have various criteria for judging the fairness of these systems. We want specific ways to measure how good they are. And I would say these are not really obvious. Like if I ask you to come up with a specific way that you could measure how good one of these systems is, it's not entirely obvious how you would even approach that. But we're going to talk about several of them, several of these criteria. And here's one basic idea, and that is that I'll say it this way. If the people, the voters I mean, if the people do have a consensus opinion, then the system should choose the winner accordingly. All right. Now this is still kind of vague what I'm saying here, but what I mean is that, you know, sometimes the voting, the attitudes of the voters are kind of confusing, and sometimes you can't really tell what the people in general want to see as the winner. But of course, there are some times when it is kind of clear that everybody feels a certain way, and in that case, the system that you're using, if it's a good system, it ought to choose the winner in the same way that all the people more or less feel. And so this is a vague idea. Here's a very specific version of this. Specifically, specifically, this is something called the majority criterion. And this is one way to judge if a system is fair or not, or good or not. And it says if a majority, of course, remember majority means more than 50%. If a majority of the voters rank some candidate in the first place, then that candidate should win. All right, this is called the majority criterion. And this is one way that you could look at one of these systems and try to judge if it's fair or not. Because it seems to me that this is a good way of judging the fairness. If it so happens that a majority of the voters actually think that one candidate is the best, then probably that one candidate should end up winning the election. This is the idea behind the majority criterion. And then we can ask, which of our four systems, the plurality, the Borda, the Condorcet, and the ranked choice, which of those four systems actually obey this majority criterion? Which of our four systems actually satisfy this? All right, and this is the kind of thing that we're going to be talking about for the next few times. Somebody comes up with a specific way that you could judge if a system is fair or not, and then we look at each of our systems and ask, are these fair in this way or not? Some of them will be, some of them won't be. That's the idea. All right. So, which of our four systems actually satisfies this criterion? And there are. Well, let's just talk about how about the plurality system? What about plurality? So this could be a typical homework or test question. Does the plurality system satisfy, this is how I would write this question on the test. Does the plurality system satisfy the majority criterion? Explain why or why not. All right, this would be a typical test question. You know, one of the items on our big list is called the majority criterion. This would be questions like this you should expect. Does the plurality system satisfy the majority criterion? So in order to answer this question, you have to remember what the plurality system means. That's the one where you only look at the first place rankings and you just count up who is on the top the most often. All right, and then what does it mean to satisfy the majority criterion? You have to remember what the majority criterion says, which is all of this. All right, it says if a majority of the voters rank some candidate in the first place, then that candidate should win the election. Anybody have a feeling about this? If you're doing the plurality, that means you don't do any fancy business. You just look at who has the most first place rankings. If there is actually somebody who's ranked first place on a majority of the ballots, are they going to win the election? If you're doing the plurality system. Plurality, of course, is like the way that we usually do voting, for instance, in the United States. Like, is it true that if the person you're voting for gets more than 50% of the votes in the plurality system, are they automatically the winner? Does that mean they're going to win? I think that is true. In order to win in the plurality system, you have to get more votes than everybody else did. But if you get more than 50% of the votes, I think this automatically means that you got more votes than anybody else did, right? So the answer to this question involves, let me just say, if your answer is yes, which in this case the answer is yes. If the answer is yes, you need to explain why. And this will take the form of, you need to write, would you mind if I use the P word? A little proof. That's the P word. If the answer to this question is yes, I think the plurality system does satisfy the majority criterion. You need to write a little proof. And so let's talk about how this should look when you explain this. So your answer should say something like, the plurality system does satisfy the majority criterion. I'll put a little colon because I'm about to explain why this is true. Maybe if you want, you can write a little proof. This is how mathematicians like to write things. Now, writing proofs in general, writing proofs in math can be hard, but these ones are always going to have a very specific kind of a structure to them, and you should think of this as kind of like a little fill in the blank. Remember, what the majority criterion says is, if there is a candidate who has more than 50% of the top position votes, then they should win the election. So your proof has to demonstrate why that is true. Now, you can write your proof however you like. I would like to suggest some specific language. If you want to write it exactly in this way, that would be great. I would start this proof no matter what you're going to say, and like before you have any ideas about what the proof is supposed to say, you should start by saying something like, imagine some candidate X is ranked first by a majority. Right? This is the setup of the majority criterion. The majority criterion is about a situation when one of the candidates is ranked first by a majority of the voters. All right? And then you have to say something. You have to have some kind of idea, but your conclusion should be, then X wins the election. Right? This is the format of how one of these proofs about the majority criterion is supposed to go. You start by imagining that someone has a majority of the votes. You have to say something in here to explain, but your conclusion should be that X ends up being the winner of the election using the plurality system. Maybe I'll say that specifically here. X wins the election using plurality. All right? And what goes in between in all the examples that we're going to do is you can fill in the blanks with like one or two sentences, probably one sentence. What goes in here should involve, I will say, in here is details, specific to how the plurality works. Because in this case, our conclusion at the bottom is supposed to be that X wins using the plurality. So what you say in here should not be about adding up points, because that's about the Borda. It should not be about the rounds, because that's about the ranked choice. It should be about how the plurality works, which is whoever gets the most votes in the first position wins the election. So can anybody explain? I mean, this will only take a few words. Why do you know if X is ranked first by a majority, that is more than 50% of the voters, why do you know that they are going to win the election using the plurality? Yeah?
Because they're more than everybody else.
Yeah, if you get a majority in the first position, you automatically have more than anybody else got, because it's not possible for someone else to get more than you if you already got a majority. All right? Because that's kind of what the word majority means. So I'm going to try to write something like that. In the middle here, I will say something like, okay, imagine X is ranked first by a majority, then X is ranked first more often than anybody else. I think that's what she said. Right? And that's really all you need to say. Then X wins the election using the plurality, because that's what it means to win using the plurality. That you are ranked first place more often than anybody else. All right? So this is the proof that I would expect you to be able to come up with. Any thoughts about that? I hope that this doesn't seem too, I know people get nervous about writing proofs. It's not such a big deal. All right? Any thoughts about that one? I got one for you all to think about. So so the plurality system does satisfy the majority criterion. Let's talk about the Condorcet system. Condorcet's method also does satisfy the majority criterion. So let's see if we can do that one. I would like you to try and write a similar proof. So how about Condorcet's method does satisfy the majority criterion. I hope you all remember what Condorcet's method is. That's the one where you compare everybody in pairs, and then you look for the one which wins in all of their pair comparisons, and you make that the winner. All right, so let's try to do our proof here. I am going to, again, start off. I would suggest when you're doing this on the homework or on a test or something, start off by writing the first and the last sentence and then fill in the middle later, because the proof always goes the same way. For the majority criterion, you say something like, imagine, it's exactly the same as last time, X gets, or how did I say it before? X is ranked first by a majority, all right? This is always how it goes. Then you need to say something which is specifically about the Condorcet method. And then your conclusion should be, then X wins using the Condorcet method. All right. I will give you a few moments to think about it. You have to write probably just one sentence in the middle, but that one sentence should be something specifically about Condorcet's method, which I hope you remember. That's the one where you compare them all in pairs and then see who wins their pair matchups. Probably you can do this in one sentence. I'm going to come around and see what your one sentence is. I would say X wins all. Like, no matter if X does anybody else, they will. Anywhere?
Yeah.
Got squiggles.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, I like that. You're saying the other way around. So it sounds like you're saying if they are the winner, then they have if they have a majority, let's say why they're the winner. Just the other way. How's it going? Got the setup. Let's chat about this. I know we didn't get around to everybody. One sort of common mistake that I saw a few people doing was to be arguing the other way around. So you assume that X is ranked first by a majority, and then you have to explain why it is that they're going to win all of their one-on-one comparisons. Some people said if they win all the one-on-one comparisons, then they'll be ranked first by a majority, but that's backwards and also not true. But so I would have said something like, imagine X is ranked first by a majority, then X automatically wins in any 1 versus 1 comparison. That's because more than 50% of the voters like X the best. That means nobody could beat X in any kind of individual matchup because X always has more than 50%. All right, and then I think that's all you need to say, really. X automatically will win in any one-on-one comparison because they are ranked in the first position by a majority of the voters. I hope that this makes sense to folks. This is, I know this is kind of difficult. Maybe at this point some of you are wondering, like, why can't we just add up the points all day long? That in some sense is a little easier because you don't have to think much to do it. You just have to like correctly add the numbers together. This one, unfortunately, you do have to think a little bit abstractly about things, which is often more difficult than just like plugging stuff into your calculator, certainly. All right. Anybody got any questions about this? You'll have more practice with this sort of a thing on the homework. We should discuss, so what I said here was, I said if the answer is yes, you need to write a little proof. All right, let's talk about what do you do if the answer is no? Like some of our systems actually do not satisfy this majority criterion. So if the answer is no, maybe I'll just say to show something doesn't satisfy our criterion. Criterion is the singular form, criteria is the plural. To show that something doesn't satisfy it, you don't write a proof in this case. You need to show what the mathematicians call a counterexample. That is, you need to invent a specific example which demonstrates that the thing you're trying to talk about is not always true. So you need to show a counterexample. For example, Borda actually does not satisfy the majority criterion. It's true. This is bad news for Borda fans. Borda does not satisfy the majority criterion. All right. It's a true fact. So in this particular way of judging which system is the best, those other ones we just talked about are better than Borda because actually Borda does not satisfy this majority criterion. And what we need to do is we need to create an example. Sometimes this is difficult, but we can handle it. We need to create an example where some candidate gets first rankings by a majority of the voters, but loses using Borda, right? That's the idea. Because that's the opposite of the majority criterion. The majority criterion says if somebody is ranked in the first position by a majority, then they should win. The opposite of that would be it is possible sometimes for someone to be ranked first place by a majority but still end up losing the election. We need to create an example where this happens, all right? And this sometimes is difficult to do, to just invent an example out of nowhere. Like one of the questions on the homework last week was for you to invent an example. By the way, I said specifically in the assignment, you don't need to write me like a little story, just give me like ABCs. But many of you insisted upon saying, oh, I interviewed my friends about what's the best breakfast cereal, and this is what they said. I didn't take off points for including the cute little story, but it's not necessary when I say invent an example. I just mean like abstractly, mathematically, give me the ABCs. Anyway, can we invent an example like this? There is some candidate who is ranked in the first position by a majority, but they end up losing using the Borda. My basic idea in building this example is sort of make Borda, remember, is about the points. The question is it possible for somebody to win on points even if they're not ranked in the first position a majority of the time? And actually that is possible. It is possible for someone to get like a lot of points in the second place, which makes them end up winning even if they weren't ranked in the first place very often. So the idea is make one person get lots of second place points. This is my basic idea behind creating this example. Trying to make up this example, you want to make it so that there's some guy who kind of wins from behind by accumulating a bunch of points from being in second place a lot. That's the basic idea. And this is something that you have to kind of mull around and think about for a while if you were trying to actually do this. But I worked this out. Actually, maybe we have a few more minutes than I had expected here. Can I, let's see if you guys can try and create such an example. So I actually did this using ABCs, and I did it in only 2 columns. I'll give you a few minutes. Chat with your friends if you like. This is a very kind of creative, I suppose, sort of brainstorming. You have to just kind of try stuff out, but see if you can make it so that one of the people is in first place on a majority of the voters, but that person ends up losing because somebody else gets more points than them. See if you can cook it up. You should be, it's kind of a matter of trial and error. Here, maybe just to get us started, how about if I tried something like this? I'm going to try it in such a way that it doesn't actually work, but what if it was something like that? Now I see A is in the first position in a majority of the voters. There's 6 voters here, and A is getting 5 of them in the first position. Although if you add up the points here, I think A is going to win this election. So what you want is to try and play around with this a little bit. You can change the numbers up here. You can change the orderings of these guys. See if you can make it so that the person who is in first place on a majority of the ballots still ends up losing by points. This is your job. I'll give you a few minutes. Feel free to chat with your friends and neighbors if you got any. I know you got neighbors. I don't know if they're friends. Maybe they could become friends. We're all friends here, right? My example here is not a good one because A is on top the majority of the time, but A also wins by points. I want it to be the opposite. I want A to be on top the majority of the time, but somebody else wins on points. This will probably involve changing these numbers around and also changing these orderings around. But I was able to do it in only 2 columns. I'll give you 1 more minute, and then we can talk about it. All right, I think your 1 minute is up. Did anybody actually cook up an example in the of the type that I wanted? Anyone want to share with us? I saw some people said, yes, I got it, but nobody wants to share. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
I did 2 columns.
Okay.
First column I did 5 4 at the top for my number.
Yeah.
And I did BAC.
Okay.
And then my second column I did 5, or yeah, it should be 4 at the top.
4, okay. And 5 in the other one?
And then 5 at the other.
All right.
And then I did CBA, and I got B to win, even though I didn't have the individual.
Okay, yeah, I think that this is more or less the same as the example that I had in mind. So in this case, C is first place on a majority of the ballots, right? That's 5 versus 4. There's 9 total voters here, and 5 of them put C on the top. So C is first place on a majority of ballots. But when we add up the points, so A has, so the points of course go 0, 1, 2, right? A has 4 times 1 plus 5 times 0, that's 4. B has 4 times 2 plus 5 times 1, which is 8 plus 5 is 13. And C has 4 times 0 plus 5 times 2, which is 10. And so B wins. Excellent. So C is first place on a majority of ballots, but C is not the winner. All right? So it is possible to come in first a majority of the time and still not be the overall winner. This, like for instance, this can happen in Mario Kart. If you're into the Mario Kart, you can actually win first place on a majority of the races, but if you get last in the other one, and then some other guy got second place in all the ones, they can actually beat you on points overall. All right, it can happen in the Borda system. This, from a certain point of view, is something that's bad about Borda, right? This kind of weird thing can happen with the Borda. So we are going to talk about this little roadmap for the rest of where we're going with this. I'm going to make a big chart which we are going to be adding onto kind of as we go along in the rest for the next couple weeks. We're going to be adding on things. The big chart involves our various systems. There's the plurality, the ranked choice voting, the Condorcet, and the Borda, right? And I am going to have various different ways you could judge if they are fair or not. And there's going to be more columns that we add as we go along. So the majority is just one way that you could try to judge these systems. But there are other ways that you could try to judge if they are good or not. But anyway, as far as the majority criterion goes, we have plurality and the ranked choice. They both, sorry, we didn't talk about the ranked choice, but we talked about plurality and the Condorcet, right? And I put checks there because they do satisfy the majority. The Borda does not, so I'll put a red X in that spot, all right? The Borda does not satisfy the majority. This is the beginnings of what will become kind of a big chart which compares the various different systems. How good are they versus one versus the other? And we will see some of them are good in some ways and bad in some other ways. This is the only way that we've talked about so far, the majority. As far as the majority is concerned, plurality and Condorcet are good. Borda is bad, and we didn't talk about ranked choice. I'm going to leave the ranked choice for you to try on the homework. That's why I left that one blank for now. All right, I think that'll do for today. See y'all next time. Let me know, please, if you have questions about the homework. You know, I'm going to go sit in my office for the next half hour. I'd be happy to talk about the homework with anybody right now or some other time.